Hi everyone, and welcome to the Art Gallery of Hamilton film discussion this week. It's a little bit different than what's been happening lately in our online film series, and I wanted to introduce our special guest today, who is Andrea Kastner. And I am Melissa Bennett, Curator of Contemporary Art at the Art Gallery of Hamilton. And we're going to talk for a few minutes today about the film Beyond the Visible, Hilma af Klint. And our discussion for about 20 minutes is not going to be so much coming from the realm of film criticism, but more so talking about how her work speaks to both of us in the contemporary context of art practices today, and which is why I thought of Andrea for this discussion, Andrea. So I want to first introduce her and thank her for coming. Andrea is a Canadian painter, and she's based in Binghamton, New York, and her work focuses on the overlooked corners of urban spaces and the sacred nature of rejected things. She holds a BFA from Mount Allison University and an MFA from the University of Alberta, and she has shown her work in galleries across Canada, and she was a 2012 finalist for the RBC Canadian Painting Competition, and has done residencies all over at the Banff Centre for the Arts, Vermont Studio Centre, and the Klondike Institute in Dawson City. And if you live in Hamilton, you might recognize Andrea because she was a member of the arts community here for a few years before moving to Binghamton, and that's how we know each other as friends in the art community here in Hamilton. So welcome, Andrea.
Thank you so much, Melissa. That was lovely.
So we wanted to kind of just get started by saying that we're both fans of af Klint's work. I think that I learned about her in undergrad, which would have been in the early 2000s, but I don't exactly remember the time and place. But I know that we both saw the exhibition at the Guggenheim, which was like a year and a half ago, maybe. And it had an impact on both of us. So I was wondering if you could tell us about what drew you to af Klint in the first place.
Yeah, so because I live 3 hours north of New York City, I get to go to New York at times to see artwork. And we started hearing about her when the show was going to open. And it was like a little earthquake, like art history will have to be rewritten. This woman has like invented European abstraction like decades before any of the people we thought did. And because I teach art, it was extra interesting to me. And yeah, so I went to the show and it was quite mind-blowing. I heard about it when I was, the Canadian artist Sarah Ann Johnson had just gone to see it. And she told me in like raving terms that this show would change my world and like completely, like, I don't know, change something profoundly in how I think about art and color. And it was not a lie. It was a really, really transformative show. Mm-hmm. What did you make of it when you saw it?
Well, I definitely had this kind of like feeling of transcendence. So I know when it talks about in the film that she was making the work, or some of the large paintings anyways, for a temple kind of experience. And I do have to say that when I went there, I had a kind of like, you know, felt spiritually like inspired, I guess. And it wasn't like looking at a regular show. And I hadn't obviously seen any of her work in person before, so it was really important to be kind of in front of the pieces after having read about them for some time. And I guess I'm really curious about kind of the history of underknown women artists in general, and you know, curious from a curatorial perspective how it is even possible that all of this work remained intact, you know, and accessible and ready to be presented as a whole. Everything in the show just looked so pristine. But to get back to your work and to talk about sort of contemporary practices, I guess, like the other thing is that her work and the aesthetic is super relevant. And I see a lot of what interested her in subject matter, but also the aesthetics, like the palette and the use of geometry even an interest in science within abstraction. You know, a lot of that comes up in the work of a lot of painters that I see today. So I was wondering if that had an effect, or if that translated into your practice very much.
Well, it's interesting that you say that it just like felt, you know, ready to be seen today, because it really did. It felt, when you see her work, it's a little bit like time traveling. Like, it doesn't feel like it was made in 1906 or 1907. It really looked so contemporary, and like it had just like been flung into our contemporary art world like through a magical portal. It was really, really cool. And I mean, sorry to go off topic for just 1 second, but in the film, they talk about the way that her temple in her mind had been a spiraling upwards, that you would slowly ascend looking at the work. And the Guggenheim, like as a museum, seemed like it was predestined to be the space that work would be shown. Like, seeing the work was exciting and in and of itself, but seeing it like presented in a upward moving spiral in its entirety was, as you said, like a spiritual experience. It was meant to be seen that way. It felt like extremely special. And it's so funny now because we're all alone in our own spaces, but I just remember also my experience of seeing the work was also that there were crowds of people. And like, it was hard to actually, like, you sort of had to navigate the spiral, but also navigate like the sort of enthusiasm for her work that was occurring at the same time, which was really cool. I think it's like maybe one of their highest attended shows possibly ever. It was also, yeah, just like extremely popular. So in terms of how it's impacting my artwork or the practices of people that I see around me, I've definitely noticed a lot of people quoting her, like a lot of like contemporary artists in my generation, like the photographer Jessica Eaton, or, you know, other people who deal with color and shapes, sort of claiming her as an influence, or like seeing themselves within her legacy. And I also have noticed that my young students at Binghamton University are really influenced by her. They keep borrowing her catalog from me and like talking about her. In the most interesting chat that we had as a class, the very first day of classes, people bring in like their favorite painting and we talk about that for a minute. And one boy brought in a Hilma af Klint painting, and the class devolved in a good way into like a full-on debate about whether her withholding her paintings for 20 years after her death had been a loss or inevitable, like whether she had robbed the world of her work for that long, or whether the world was genuinely not yet ready for her.
It's hard to imagine how self-aware a person would be, you know, to just write, you know, just to kind of like make that claim that in 20 years, this is what needs to happen, at least 20 years. Like I really come back to thinking about her working in isolation, I guess. Like, she had her four women in her cohort that agreed with her in terms of like, you know, wanting to do spiritual work, but also the aesthetic of her practice, you know, maybe was admired by them, or they had an affinity. But anyways, other than that, like, she was quite alone in that time and place.
Yeah, it's really astonishing that like how did she know? How did she know that we'd be ready for it eventually? It's really, really amazing. And what do you think about that question about whether the world, like, how would the world have received her if she had actually tried to exhibit her work
In that time?
11 or whatever?
I will insert a small like nod to the Art Gallery of Hamilton, because one thing I know about that period is that in Stockholm, there was also William Blair Bruce at that time. So I don't know if you remember, if you ever heard about William Blair Bruce. So his, he can be referred to as one of Canada's first Impressionist painters. So he's Canadian, he lived in Hamilton, but he also spent time in Stockholm around that time. And his partner was Caroline Benedicts Bruce, and she also went to the Royal Academy of Art. Yeah, at the same time as
That's amazing.
Yeah, and so I was wondering if Hilma and William would have ever met or talked, but I asked Toby Bruce, our curator of historical art, and she confirmed what I thought, which was that his work is pretty conservative, and maybe his beliefs were too at the same time. So he may not have been ready to run with her in terms of her seances and her spiritual practice. But then there was Caroline, his partner. So potentially they knew each other, or they were in the same classes, or I don't know. But anyways, it sounds like everything that she ran into was oppositional to what she was doing. And maybe that's why she had this tight-knit group of people. So it sounds like even her family, saw her as an outsider, just like being a woman and declining a marriage proposal. And, the fact that she went to this island to have her own studio and paint by herself. And it's hard for me to transport myself to think about how she was looking for acceptance. It sounds like, that she invited Rudolf Steiner to her studio and maybe was affected in a negative way because he didn't like her work. So certainly there were a lot of barriers in terms of the patriarchy at the time. And a lot of barriers, I think, in terms of just what was accepted in the art world at the time. And, she started out, we could see in the film, with her painting nudes or landscapes or botanical pieces. And obviously that's a little bit more acceptable to everybody. So anyways, we're really lucky that she pushed on, even though I'm sure that to me, it seems like, it wouldn't have gone much further if she had tried to look for public approval for a long time in her life.
I totally agree with you. I feel like there were, in the film that we just watched, there were like windows that you could see where she was trying to see whether the world was ready, like Steiner, and like that one show in England that she sort of tried to get together, and like she was clearly like she was ready. She was just testing out the world, and the world was repeatedly telling her that it wasn't ready for her. And yeah, the fact that she had the strength to sort of hone in on it all and make so much work, like 100 paintings in a year. Like, I don't know anyone who works that fast and that hard. It's just like amazing to even think about being her in that time.
What do you think it is then that, like, so if she was inspired, so if we can kind of try and figure out how to situate her in her time, she was inspired by science, right? According to what we can read and find out about her. So, and then her aesthetic, like she's using egg tempera, and like she obviously has limited like materials at the time. What do you think then is appealing about her aesthetic today? Like what, like she was responding to the discovery of scientific things that maybe introduced like depictions of atoms or rays or whatever, like, different things that were kind of exciting in the time. So what do you think about her aesthetic is interesting to students today?
I asked one of my students that in preparation for our chat. Like, I was like, hey, so Andrew, like, what exactly do you think, like, you as, he's like a 19-year-old boy in 2020, like, what is it that draws you to her work? And he said that she shows that it's possible to enter another's consciousness or to meld multiple consciousnesses. And I think that's a really interesting statement. And I totally see that. I see like students looking for how art can convey meaning, and I can see that her work does that. It like very obviously connects to like just these really profound themes of like, how do dualities interact, or how do consciousnesses connect with each other throughout the world? And like watching the film that we just watched just made me really think about whether there is a collective unconscious, like, because some of the similarities between work that she was making in secret and then the work that eventually became such an important part of the canon. Remember, Melissa, that one scene where they're like juxtaposing Hilma's work from, 1906, 7, 15 or whatever, with works that happened like 5, 10, 20 years later. That, to me, that was the most powerful part of the movie.
Yeah.
It was like really mind-blowing.
Like with the part where they were showing like
there's
her against
scene, and there's like her painting and Kandinsky's painting.
Oh yeah.
Her painting and Warhol's painting.
Mm-hmm.
Warhol, like
yeah, the Warhol was pretty
like, just the way she was like in tune with like basic aesthetic things that like other people only came to much later. I don't know. I found that very powerful.
So she was like, looking at elevating or exploring, I guess, a different level of consciousness and expressing that in this 2D form. But she was also trying to access a higher level of consciousness, right? That
Theosophy.
Yeah, theosophy, and that like through seances she got a commission, for example, of like with specific instructions that she agreed to do. She agreed to do this commission according to guidelines, I guess, set out by this, I think like someone called like a high master or something like that. And then I was reading that she told her group about that, her group of close artists, and they said, I don't know if you should do that because that's there's a risk of going mad.
Yes, I thought about that too.
There's a risk that you're going to be looked at as mad, which I was just like, okay, like it's just interesting to see how, I guess, the parameters around like around how people could think about stuff, or so anyways, it leads me to go back. So how do contemporary artists work today? What is attractive about her work? And I wanted to know also, I wanted to ask you, do you know any artists? Like, I know a lot of artists that say, I work in a spiritual realm, or I work, I want to activate different layers of consciousness, or I want to explore in my work, I want to use automatic drawing, or I want to explore ways that I can activate different parts of myself. But do you know any artists that try and access like somebody like a high master, or somebody, like who work as like a medium to channel?
I don't, like, not personally.
Yeah, I think I heard, okay, that was a question that I had for you. Yeah, I think I know of one artist who's like calls themselves an outsider artist. I think I know of one, but anyways, I was just curious if like your students would be saying that they're trying to access a higher level like that, like another realm.
I mean, there are hints of that, but I don't know anyone who's fully committed to like to the level that Hilma was.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like all the artists I know who, meditate or, do, like mind altering substances and that kind of thing. Like they have one foot in like reality and like go to that place. I feel like Hilma was more like fully committed, but of course we don't know. I mean, we don't know her. We have her journals and we have access. But yeah, like I feel like nobody in my immediate circle, people that I've met in real life, are like quite as completely committed to accessing a higher plane as she was, which is, I mean, I feel like she's quite singular. I mean, she's a genius. Like that's all I could think when I saw it. One thing that I wanted to bring up, just to bounce it off you. I don't know if it's an insight or just a completely maybe too far thought. But I was in the movie. Do you know the scene where they look at the navigational charts and her family history as navigational artists? And I was thinking about the way she would have grown up, knowing that the skies, the stars, and the seas were connected, like and that it was a matter of life or death to understand, like the way that the stars in the sky, the currents of the water, and drawing were like all connected together. And that
the moon?
And the moon, yeah. And just how powerful it was, because sailors would depend on that to like stay alive on the seas. And I feel like growing up with that force in her life might have given her courage and confidence to like understand that.
That's a really nice, yeah, that's actually really nice to think. It's kind of comforting actually, because I felt kind of bad for her being the only artist in the family, but
yeah, I don't know. I like she came from a heritage of artists, and also because she uses all these lines and text in her work. And so looking at the navigational charts within the movie, I was so grateful that the movie gave us those images. It made me feel like I understood her work a little bit better. Like there was a connection to her family's heritage, even if it was, taken in a more creative and like completely artistic direction.
I love that part too. Yeah, that's actually really nice to think about that, because you can definitely see like maybe her use of line. And I'm just looking at this, like maybe that looks like a navigational chart. I don't know. Just the use of line and
the pointed lines, yeah. The way directions can be charted, and how I just feel like part of her genius is understanding the connections between, like a spiral in a staircase and a spiral in like, I don't know if they knew about DNA, but she has all these spirals in her work that all seem to connect to each other. And then just like in her philosophy as well, like she understands how she can take images, and this is a very artistic understanding, and maybe something in terms of your question about how we receive it as artists today, is she can see the connection between an image of a spiral and all its different ramifications, whether it's like a visual image or a theological image.
Does that how does it work for you in your practice? Because I know like you'll visit a site and kind of spend time with it, and then like how does that kind of work for you to translate into a painted image?
Yeah, so I'm not as confident as Hilma with like describing that. I feel like sometimes I'm at a loss for words when it comes to describing those kind of connections. And I think that's why I make paintings, like because I have trouble voicing it. But I was thinking about that because she was so honest and like unembarrassed about her spiritual thoughts. And so I occasionally think about things like the idea of, it's like an idea from Jewish theology, well, not really Jewish theology, but from that the world has been broken into fragments, and that our job is to put them all back together. And when I work with fragments, I work with like lost things in landfills or in just like construction sites or whatever. And I think about the way things get fragmented and get put back together. And I think about painting as a way of kind of sewing them back together. But like, I feel embarrassed when I talk like that. Like, I don't know how to like, I'm blushing already. I don't know how to like be a 21st century person who has these like kind of like weirdo semi-religious kind of thoughts about art, and then just be like, you know, a person who exists normally in the world.
That's an amazing idea. I think you did very well describing it.
I believe this is recorded. Oh my gosh.
Anyway, she wrote that stuff in her diaries, right?
Yeah,
she wasn't giving a Zoom talk.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I've been in isolation too long, Melissa.
Okay, my timer is going off, so So did you have anything else that you wanted to add?
That's a good, yeah, I had a few thoughts maybe in conclusion about, so we're Canadian art lovers and we're looking at this Swedish artist. And I was also thinking when we watched the movie about, so last summer or at one of my residencies at a landfill, I read Emily Carr's diaries. And Lauren Harris kept bugging her to look into theosophy. And there was all this complaining in her diary about theosophy and like, oh, Lauren Harris keeps trying to push me towards this. And like, that's not really my thing. But I guess when I'm thinking about like Hilma, I was also thinking about like theosophy and how it pervaded various artistic traditions, including the Canadian one. And I don't know, these kind of fun connections between our art history that we've learned about, or automatiste art in Quebec, and learning about this person and her own kind of philosophical background.
Yeah, I actually didn't, Emily Carr did not pop into my mind. But yeah, that is something I would love to think about.
Well, Emily Carr had a similar
yeah
isolation thing where she was just very determined to make her own stuff, even if the world wasn't ready for it.
Yeah, and yeah, definitely looking. Yeah, she definitely seemed open to other, like, I guess, cultural topics than so more so than the group. Yeah.
So that's
a good point.
Just like, I guess, a little heritage of different people dealing with these things in their own isolated spaces. And we all have a lot of time to think about it now in our own thoughts.
Well, I want to thank you very much for taking the time.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much. This has made my week.
Yay. Okay, so there is more exciting news, which is that next week there's going to be another film discussion about the film, and this time the director is going to be interviewed. She's going to be speaking with Ryan Ferguson, I think, at the Art Gallery of Hamilton. So thank you everyone for watching, and thank you very much, Andrea, for participating.
And thank you for indulging me, and thank you for what you've watched. And yeah, thank you for bringing this wonderful movie to all of our attentions.
I hope everyone enjoyed it. Bye.
Bye.